Live. Good morning, everyone, and we are live. Welcome to Behind the Markets today. And I am joined by my wonderful co pilot, Stephanie. And a good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning, Munyumba. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And welcome to everybody who's on this morning's show,
Are you
Behind the
able to get
Markets.
me? Oh,
Yes, I
great.
am. I'm able to get you perfectly. And welcome to Behind the Markets. It is the Enterprise Thursday edition. We'll be going through a few stories today, our general market roundup, and we'll be continuing our intergenerational transition. Remember, we are talking about how to move from how to transfer businesses from one generation to another. We're talking about principles of succession to try and help with credible succession, and also to do with what we call fulfillment planning, your life fulfillment planning, especially for those of my clients who are entrepreneurs who are always worried about how am I going to pass on my business assets from myself to my child. Let's go into today's market roundup, though there are some interesting stories today. So, looking into this morning's market roundup, it is the 14th of September 2023, Enterprise Thursday edition. We are seeing the Kwacha continuing above the 21 mark. The dollar is above the 21.13 kwacha mark, up 0.29% from yesterday, and up 1.83% on the week, 7.85% on the month, and 16.76% year to date. So we are still seeing a rallying dollar that's on a bull run with strong indicators, but signaling that we're getting into overbought territory at any given time. The stock market yesterday moved up with another update on Copperbelt Energy Corporation, which is on its fourth consecutive upward day, up 0.04% is the whole stock market, 1.26% on the week, 5.3% on the month, and 24.8% year to date. With the bond market up 0.17% yesterday, but down 0.69% in dollars, and the interest rates also dropped down a little bit. Now, moving into the FX rate, you can see that we are on a mega movement upward with the FX rate, especially from that drop that happened at the end of July when we got our data, when we got news on the when we got news on when we started to get news about the conclusion of our debt deals, and we're also now starting to go into private negotiations. You can see we've had a straight movement upwards all the way up to 21.13, and we're heading to all-time highs. We're only 6.8% away from the all-time highs of the dollar. As you can see, also that we're also starting to get a little bit of slowdown in the FX rate movement upwards, but we're still trading above the 200-day moving average. Now, when we look at the rand was also up about 0.87% yesterday, up to 1.119, up 3.16% on the week, 9.47% on the month, and 4.72%. So there's still some inflation pressure on imported goods coming in from cross-border traders, and we can see that there is a lot more pressure building upwards by the percentage of days where we're seeing upwards movements on the rand as opposed to downwards movements. Now, on top of that, we're also seeing that the GRZ bond index up 0.17%, still at all-time highs at 19.29% year to date, while in dollars it's only up 2.16% year to date, but down 0.69%. And what we're also seeing is that interest rates dropped yesterday by 0.004%, still up 0.97%. So almost a whole percent upwards on interest rates, meaning that we still have a lot of selling pressure when it comes to our rates. And on commodities, copper moved up only so slightly, 0.07% upwards and 0.27% up year to date, while oil is up 7.32% year to date and up 0.05%, while gold dropped by 0.25%. Now, we are still seeing that this is our preliminary outlook for the end of the month. It is the 14th, so these are still preliminary outlooks, but this is getting more and more cemented that we're expecting a 32.52 kwacha pump price for petrol by the end of this month, which will probably signal another hike in transportation costs, up 3 kwacha 10 in Ngwe, and probably 10.55%, mainly due to a split or a joint push of the FX rate and the global crude price. So there has to be some strong supply chain changes by the government or by the energy authorities to mitigate this inflation risk that's coming from our transportation costs. While we're also looking at wealth insurance assets, Bitcoin is up 1.1% yesterday due to the main movement in Bitcoin in dollars, and we also saw Ethereum up 1.7% and also gold up 0.03%, mainly due to the fact that the dollar movement up mitigated the drop in gold prices. Now, year to date, what are we seeing across the board? Gold up 23.5%, but the stock market is still leading of the mainstream assets, 24.8%, while bonds up 19.3%, dollars up 16.8%. All assets are performing much better than inflation. Bitcoin up 8.41%. 84.1%, while we're seeing Ethereum up 57.1% year to date. But remember, when you look at it from a quarterly perspective, you are seeing that bonds up 5.2%, stocks are up 11.2%, dollars up 20.1%, and gold is up 20.3%, while Bitcoin and Ethereum are up 2.8%, meaning in dollars they've had a horrible session because that is mainly due to the dollar effect that's actually moving these up. The only thing out of the mainstream assets that outperform the dollar is gold, only so slightly. So those of you who are looking for your wealth insurance, you're seeing it better held in US dollars itself, but the mainstream assets are still performing pretty positively. That's why you're seeing quarter to date, and it looks as though the stock market is going to outperform quarter three. In the stock market is likely to outperform quarter two as well, winding up getting of results in this period. Now, Stephanie, let's get into some of the deep dive stories today. One of the biggest stories that we saw in Africa yesterday was that Kenya plans to slash corporations tax in order to increase compliance and attract investment. The Ruto administration, which was under pressure to raise taxes, is now looking to actually slash taxes down from 30% for corporate income tax, in other words, taxes on profits, down to 25%. Kenya's rate is higher than the global average of 23%. And the African average of 29%, which has led to low compliance and eligibility, which begs to ask the question, should Zambia actually be joining? Is our 30% tax too high? So if Kenya, who's sitting at 30%, is now looking at saying, why don't we also slash it now down to 25? Should we now be answering the question? And I'll throw that question to you, Stephanie. And I know it becomes a hot-blooded issue because everybody says, no, why are these ones paying more taxes and these other ones are paying more taxes? Because the Kenyan government, I think, has understood that the first and most important thing is that you need businesses around to create jobs for people. That's the reality. Now, we're not talking about foreign or local. They're talking about resident firms. That whole thing is meant for resident companies. In other words, companies operating here, yes. But if we're looking at the whole foreign-owned versus local-owned, I think the biggest problem, Stephanie, has always been that we've created so many regulations that we have hindered the entrance and the growth of locally owned businesses, especially also with the high costs of capital that the government has endorsed as put on them. But the question is, should we at least, if the world average for corporate tax is 23%, then shouldn't we be somewhere at the world average for corporate tax? I don't know what's your thoughts, Stephanie.
You might want to phrase that question again.
Should Zambia actually be considering running its corporate income tax, in other words, the taxes that it charges on profits, actually at the 23% global level, or should we keep it at 30%? Because currently we had it at 35, it got dropped to 30. So should we actually be considering the 23% global average that Kenya is getting closer to? Okay,
definitely.
So, yeah.
I get your question now. And just before I get to respond and be part of our conversation in terms of our social media audience, that of course is Money FM Zambia 93.7 on Facebook. And on LinkedIn, it's Money FM Zambia. I see that we're also live on LinkedIn. It's a page called Money FM Zambia. And on our mainstream, do get to respond on 077 1616290, 077 1616290. 290. I think for me, 23% global is just okay, simply because I think it's better to be in a chain of a lot of people who, of course, you know, you're not the only one doing it, than to actually be at your own pace. Also, we get to look at how it actually gets to affect, obviously, business on the other side, which is the most important thing.
And I think for me, the main reason I'm bringing this conversation up is because there's always this battle between labor and business, and I think it's always got to do with labor unions, and we're always trying to fight over it. Here's my main concern, people. The most, and it's an old saying, Stephanie. The most important social program, or the most effective social program to pull people out of poverty, Stephanie, is a job. Okay, the first thing that actually frontline pulls a person out of poverty is having a job, and then having that job pay an income that grows faster than inflation. That is the main thing we should be looking at, not through labor unions and all that, but mainly through demand. Okay, the reality, Stephanie, is Zambian workers are always underpaid. People say employers have a tendency to underpay workers anyway. Zambian workers are underpaid because there are too few employers. Not because employers are just greedy, but because there are too few employers. If there were more employers in the country, there'd be more competition for Zambian workers. Let me give you a simple example. Think of it like maize. Okay, when there's not enough maize in the country, Stephanie, what happens to the price? It goes up. So it's the same thing that happens with labor hours or workers. When there's
It
not
goes
enough
up.
workers because they're exactly, wages will start to go up. So if we want to see wages escalate in Zambia or grow in Zambia, we need to make sure that there are more employers in the country. And how do you do that? By giving them better conditions to operate under, because you have to make it profitable for them. And then secondly, Stephanie, when they have less taxes to pay, they've got more profits to reinvest in their business, because 60% of money, of capital, of business capital, both working capital and investment capital, both come from business reserves. So when businesses have more profits to play around with, guess what they tend to do? They tend to invest more in their business so that they can grow it, because every entrepreneur wants to grow their business. They want to clock a profit and they want to grow their business. So if you truly want to see more people getting employed, you need to give businesses more profits to play with. And yes, people externalize their profits. They do all sorts of things. I'm sure we can start to work out other regulations to watch out for people externalizing their profits and other things. But I think what we need to do is make this as lucrative as possible. Take a look at countries like Mauritius, by the way. Remember that we're competing in an economy around with other people who are dropping their corporate taxes. And then you've got Mauritius, who has it at 12%. So always remember that you're always competing against Mauritius, who has a 12% tax rate. So that's a question I'd like to throw out to people out there on our social media audience. Given that the world average income tax is 23%, should we in Zambia lower our corporate income tax from 30% to at least 25%, or even 23%? To be honest, Stephanie, I'd even have it at 20%. I honestly think that we're not at a point yet where we have enough employers. So we need to stimulate employers. I know we create turnover tax opportunities, create all sorts of things for people to be able to actually able to employ themselves. We need to get as many small to medium hiring enterprises. The good thing is, yes, the number of employers in this country has grown astronomically. We've grown from about 30,000 odd employers in 2012 to about 2021, where we've got over 200,000 employers in this country. So at least we are starting to pick up. This is according to the labor force surveys from 2012 to 2021. So at least we're starting to see that we've had a tenfold increase in our employer base. And that's been good because more people have gone into entrepreneurship, and that entrepreneurship has turned into hiring people. But that's still not enough, Stephanie. We have a 10 million labor force. And then on top of that 10 million labor force, remember that the majority of them are not educated. So we need industrial jobs. We need industrial work. We also need decentralized industrial work. Was having a conversation yesterday about the fact that mayors are meeting very soon in Livingston. And one of the things we should be discussing is how do we get all the economic activity happening in the industrial area to start spreading out around the country so that we can get more jobs to the rural sector and start to get rural industrial towns being picked up. Stephanie, most of the groundnuts in this country are grown in Eastern Province, but most of the peanut butter is produced in Lusaka. Why is the peanut butter not being produced in Eastern Province? I know that the access to market, yes, is closer to Lusaka, access to electricity and better production facilities, but that means that we need to make sure that we need to figure out what do we need to do to get the manufacturing class to start going closer to their commodities. So when people are producing, they need to be producing closer to the commodities so the jobs can spread out. And these are the things that the mayors should be discussing. It shouldn't be just an AGM for mayors and a discussion session. This is what they should be talking about in order to actualize the decentralization agenda. But in order to do this, Stephanie, we need to sometimes give tax concessions. And people don't like that, okay? Because we pay taxes, we pay VAT, we pay high fuel prices, all this stuff, and we're upset. But let me tell you what and even Dumisani Ngube says this. He says, entrepreneurs are a national asset that need to be cultivated and grown. Why? Because without entrepreneurs, Stephanie, you know what happens? There are no jobs. There are no jobs. So the very people who are crying about, no, but my life is expensive. You know what will happen when the entrepreneurs stop operating? Your life will be unaffordable, not because things are expensive, because you will have no money. Okay? So when there isn't an entrepreneur, you will have no money at all. So let alone not having enough money. So what's worse, Stephanie? Not having money or not having enough money? I think I'd rather battle with not having enough than not having any. I don't know what your thought is on that.
I'd rather have some money rather than not having money. Yeah. I'd rather have a little bit of money than not having money at all.
Because remember, people, as much as people will tell you minimum wage, the real minimum wage in this world is zero because unemployment pays you nothing. That's one thing you have to remember. You earn nothing when you're unemployed. So the real minimum wage on paper, yes, that's what the government can tell you. But the real minimum wage you'll gain is a big fat goose egg when you're not employed and you're earning zero and nobody's paying you a salary because nobody is hiring you. That's how we get those pictures like we had that time. Was it Golden Oakland or somewhere where thousands of Zambians converged because there were 20 jobs, clerical jobs, not just people who are working regular grocery store jobs. Thousands of Zambians converged on there for jobs because there's nothing in the country. When we're doing census jobs, what did we see? Thousands, tens of thousands of Zambians converged on census jobs, just manual, simple jobs, because there is no opportunity for employment in the country. So we shouldn't be having a debate about whether we should be giving entrepreneurs. We need to give them as much support as possible because we need job creation. That is the number one thing we need in this country. We actually need job creation. In fact, when the World Economic Forum did its risk analysis of Africa, do you know what the number one risk of Zambia actually is? It's underemployment. That is the number one risk because it causes social instability, it causes crime, it causes people to actually harm the environment because they have to start throwing things all over the place, cutting down trees as much as possible. Underemployment is the biggest scourge that actually threatens the fiber and stability of this country. It is a threat. It's not just a minor inconvenience. It's an actual threat, bigger than a military threat, bigger than environmental threats. And I'm not saying those things aren't credible, but underemployment is the number one threat to the stability of this country. It creates political instability because people start voting in any way, shape, or form when they're hungry. Njala is painful when it comes to people's voting decisions as well. It's painful when it comes to people's economic decisions, household decisions, everything. So the number one thing we need to be driving at in this country, and I'm not talking about bringing in a bunch of foreign investors to try and create jobs. I'm talking about cultivating an entrepreneurial class from our people to make sure we are hiring each other. We need to make sure that the person, Stephanie, who takes a risk, who decides not to be employed, but decides to start an enterprise and then grow that enterprise to start offering other people a salary, no matter how meager that is, should not be punished by the system. That's the problem in this country. You almost punish the person who takes a risk to actually make things better, while everyone else sits on the sideline and says, well, the government must look into this. The government is never going to look into this. We're all going to stay unemployed if that's our mentality. I know that's my daily rant, so now let's move into the other parts of the stories today. Other stories that we did see, Stephanie, yesterday was oil prices paused in their rallies as the U.S. built 4 million barrels of oil, and U.S. production is actually at the highest it's been for quite some time since March 2020, and just a bit shy of the overall record of 13.1 million barrels. So U.S. increased production is starting to put downward pressure slightly on the oil prices, but not enough to circumvent what's happening in the Middle East, where there's reduction in production. 4 million extra barrels of oil popped up in the U.S. inventory. That was one of the highest that we've seen. And also, what we've also seen that might be pushing prices upwards is that U.S. exports have fallen to 3 million barrels a day versus the previous number of 4.9 million barrels. So that actually is affecting world supply. So U.S. supply to the world is actually down, and that will affect especially Brent prices, which affect Zambian oil. So we're still on the verge of 32 kwacha at the pump price, 32.5 kwacha at the pump price or more by the end of this month. I'm suspecting probably more. The other piece of news that we saw recently was Shanghai Exchange is exploring a potential London Metals Exchange nickel rival. The Shanghai Metals Exchange is studying the structure of the nickel market and the supply demand to instigate to try and see if they can participate in creating an alternative market. They did launch a physical deliverable copper contract in 2020 in an attempt to allow their domestic market to be more influential on the metals price. However, there's not been enough liquidity in that market, so therefore the contract has not had enough influence. But you can see that the Shanghai Metals Exchange is now actively trying to compete with the London Metals Exchange. So as we're building out our metals trading activity, let's always remember that we need to have two desks where we can actually start sending our metals to. So there will be two competing exchanges. And also because remember, nickel is becoming one of our bigger alternative mines. If we're looking at our non-traditional, non-agricultural exports, we're looking at nickel and other alternative metals, which are actually doing quite well on the market. One of the biggest pieces of news, by the way, that came out today is that in the first half of the year, Peru has held on to its position as the number 2 copper supplier. However, DRC is actually on the verge of overtaking Peru. Yes, people, DRC, who Zambia used to produce more copper than in 2010, is now close to becoming the number 2 copper producer in the world. Simply because we thought it was funny to play around with our copper industry, while DRC did not decide to slaughter the golden goose. Peru now has seen an output of 20% higher in the first half of the year. However, that's been tempered by the fact that mining investment has started to slow down, and political turmoil and protest are also slowing down mining activity. Peru has produced 2.4 million tons of copper in 2022, while DRC was right behind them with 2.4 million tons. So 2.45 versus 2.4. DRC is just about 2% now behind Peru and is actually on track, according to its 13% a year growth rate, to actually overtake Peru as the number 2 copper producer in the world. Peru is just ahead of DRC also on shipments of copper for export, 1.4 million versus the 1.3 million in the year. So here's the actual copper production that we're seeing with an estimate of 2023. We're looking at DRC, which was just 340,000 metric tons versus Peru 1.25 back in 2010. At this point, Zambia was producing closer to Peru, around about 800,000. I'll show you the chart with including Zambia tomorrow. But if you start to look, DRC has been on a very slow path. Look at the blue line. The blue bar is actually DRC. And as you can see, especially since 2019, they overtook Zambia in the early parts of the decade, and now they are on the verge of overtaking Peru. They are neck and neck with Peru this year, meaning that DRC has actually done something right with their mineral policy that has actually managed to push production up. And whatever the DRC is doing, that's what Zambia has also got to think about very carefully. because now they're actually becoming more independent when it comes to that, and they're not really needing us as much as we thought. Copper stockpiles have also risen to a 2-year high amid waning demand. Copper inventories at the London Metals Exchange increased by 5.7%, marking a stark contrast from a few months ago when they fell to their lowest. So in other words, there's more copper sitting in inventory. That's also what's pushing prices down to 8,300. Consumption of green technology, tight supply. Copper prices have remained unchanged year on year. We've also seen that the world's copper consumer, China, has been posting weaker economic data, and that's been part of the problem driving all of this. Finally, Stephanie, in our topic of discussion today, remember we've been on our intergenerational wealth. What do you think is the most critical factor to a good intergenerational business succession? What are your quick thoughts before we get into the 5 tips today we're going to give on what drives a good, or the 5 components of a good intergenerational wealth transition? What do you think, Stephanie, are the most important factors in transitioning a business from one generation to another?
For me, I think it's the conducive environment, transformation of the mindset. Also, most importantly, is a conducive environment, because in as much as you have a transformed mindset, if the environment does not allow you, is not conducive for you to do and build your wealth, then it's not possible. On the other side, if you can come through on 077 1616290 to contribute, to ask a question, or obviously just to let us know that you're logged on to Money FM Radio. Also, don't forget to send us your comments on our Facebook page, Money FM Radio 93.7. What do you think is the critical factor of a good intergenerational business succession?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 factors very quickly today, Stephanie, and that is the question that we're going to point out to people. As we said, what do you think is the most critical factor in intergenerational business transition? Obviously, succession, that's the other wording. So we have been talking about your fulfillment plan. In other words, handing over, creating a good legend that's creating your business, or solving a problem in society with that business, leaving that business behind, that's your legacy. And then the lineage is, who are you leaving that business to? Remember what we've always said, your lineage is the single most important factor in what is actually going to be left behind. So we talked last time about the 5 principles: enlightenment, education, exposure, experience, and the endpoint. As very important factors, and we use Moses and Joshua, David and Solomon as examples of all of this. Using the same 2 examples, Stephanie, we're going to talk about 5 critical factors, and we're going to go through them pretty quickly. The first one, Stephanie, that you want to try and hand over. There are 5 components of things you need to hand over from one generation to the other. So the first one is a culture. The beliefs and behaviors that support the continuity of the actions. Remember that everything you do, Stephanie, is a result of what you believe. Your behavior is a result of your beliefs. So you need to hand over a series of beliefs. Moses spent the book of Deuteronomy reading the history and the culture to Joshua and his generation, while David instructed Solomon to continue the ways and beliefs of worshiping God and inheriting the mission. So the first thing you need to transfer from one generation to another is the culture, which is founded on the beliefs. So there has to be that also part of a vision transfer. The second thing you need to hand over, Stephanie, remember that one of the most important factors in anyone's outcomes is character. So this, in terms of your culture, you need to hand over your values, which determine your character. The personal traits that are important to the continuity and of the purpose and the mission. Moses and God both instructed Joshua to be strong and courageous. Those are character traits. David also instructed Solomon to be strong and courageous. So you need to hand over critical character traits that will continue the works that you've had. The cause, Stephanie, is also important. The cause is an intergenerational mission forming the purpose statement. That's one of the things we're missing in this country. We really don't have intergenerational visions that are at family level, political level, national level, continental. We are missing it here. There is no intergenerational mission where people are actually handing over something that has not come to pass yet. Moses handed down the mission of taking over the promised land to Joshua. The people were to build a kingdom in the promised land. So Moses knew my job was to get up to here. Joshua will get up to one stage, then the others will build while in the promised land. Because he knew that somebody has to get them to the promised land, someone has to take over the promised land, someone has to build in the promised land. Those are different people who are handing over each mission. David handed down the mission of building the temple to Solomon. He knew that his was to establish a kingdom, and then Solomon's job was to build a temple around it at the center of that kingdom. So that was the cause. What is the cause of your business? Are you handing it?
Okay, so we seem to have lost Munyumba on the other side. We hope we get him back pretty much early. Now, when he about the cause, he's actually mission and getting the children of Israel into the promised land. And we also see that David on the other side handed down the mission of building the temple to Solomon. Hopefully we do have Munyumba getting back on the other side, but seems like we have lost Munyumba. On this note, we've spoken about a lot of things. I guess this is where we get to wrap up with Behind the Markets. Until tomorrow again on a Friday, it's bye for now. Keep it locked on to money.